So my name is Jamie Coleman, and in a minute I'm going to start my Earth Live lesson talking all about seabirds and albatross. I'm coming at you live from London. I've just come back from the field in the Galapagos, and in a parallel universe right now I would be in the Pacific somewhere traveling to French Polynesia, but London is almost the same thing. So thank you for keeping me company in my isolation. As I begin to talk, feel free to ask questions in the live feed, and I will endeavour to get to these at the end. And if you're watching this after, then please feel free to, I think my details are down at the bottom of the screen. Find me on Instagram or Twitter, or send me an email and I'll answer your questions. Hello, Ollie. Hello, Emily. Thank you very much, Lizzie, as well, for sorting this out. I've really enjoyed watching the Earth Live series happen and have been learning a lot already from home. So looking forward to seeing some more of them. So I better get started. So for those of you that have just joined, my name is Jamie Coleman, and this is my Earth Live session on albatross. I'm a marine biologist, and I specialize in living in the middle of nowhere, usually surrounded by seabirds, seals, and/or penguins. And in these places, there's generally not many people, and I tend to be very happy here. Like most of the people watching this, I grew up absolutely obsessed with this man, Sir David Attenborough, glued to any documentary I could find that he was part of, and as a result, always interested in nature and the natural world. Unsurprisingly, this obsession resulted in me traveling to university to study marine biology. Just checking the comments. I studied marine biology and then pursued just about any opportunity to get to wild places and out into the natural world after this. And once I graduated from university, I was lucky enough to live and work in seabird paradise. The Farne Islands, which are an archipelago off the northeast coast of England, are seabird paradise. They're home to 30,000 pairs of puffins, and as well as tens of thousands of other incredible species of birds. Throughout the summer, we would study and work with the puffins and the seabirds, and then the winter was spent working with one of the longest studied grey seal populations on the planet. Amongst those seabirds were these. This is an Arctic tern, and this was my favorite seabird on the Farne Islands. They're absolutely stunning birds, and we had hundreds of these living on our doorstep. Every single morning when you go to the toilet, they would dive bomb you, they would cover you in poo and guano, but you couldn't help but love them and respect them because you knew where they were a few months previously. These are arguably the world's most impressive migratory species. Bear in mind that they weigh less than an iPhone. They spend their winters all the way down in Antarctica. Then came my next challenge. I was presented with the opportunity to work for the British Antarctic Survey, something that I'd always dreamed of, and this adventure took me 8,000 miles south to the subantarctic island of South Georgia. To get here, you have to take a military flight with the Royal Air Force all the way down to the Falkland Islands. This is a small group of islands off the south coast of South America. And then you get on board a ship, and like me, it took 4 days on the fisheries patrol vessel to get down to South Georgia. Very bumpy, very unpleasant crossing. Everyone is feeling seasick, but you're surrounded by albatross, so it's all good. When you're surrounded by albatross, life is always good. And then you arrive in South Georgia. And despite having tried on all of your cool Antarctic clothes, dressing up in all of the gear that they've given you, taking hundreds of selfies and telling all of your friends that you're going to go and live with penguins in Antarctica, you see land, you step outside and you think, oh my God, it's really cold. And then you get even closer and you forget about the cold because the ground is moving. There's seabirds everywhere, there's seals, there's penguins. And when you look above them, the landscape is absolutely spectacular. And I was lucky enough to live on South Georgia Island for 2 stints. At first, I was here in 2015 for 14 months, so that was throughout the winter as well. And I lived on the mainland working as a higher predator biologist, and I was working with penguins and seals mostly. And then I returned to this place, Bird Island. I was here in 2018. Bird Island is a much smaller island off the north of South Georgia. It's about 4 miles long by 2.5 miles wide, and there is a seabird or seal every 1.5 meters squared, and that includes 4 species of albatross. Now, this is not an albatross. This, in fact, is a giant petrel. As you can probably tell by this picture, it's a pretty gruesome bird. It's awesome. They are a top predator and scavenger in Antarctica, and the reason I picked this picture is because albatross belong to a group of birds called the tube noses, and this picture really shows why they get that name. So you see this tubular nostril here on the top of their bill, and this is going to allow them to thrive in the open ocean. So the part of that tube nose family also includes petrels and shearwaters, storm petrels, prions, fulmars, and this tubular nostril and their head design is going to help them thrive as a true seabird. And so it's important for several reasons. If you live your life on the high seas, then you have to be able to drink salt water. You have to be able to drink seawater. If we tried it, it would end quite badly. I don't recommend anyone trying this at home. But they can. They've got this tiny little gland in their head where the salt goes. And then they're going to remove all of the excess salt, which is going to be pumped out through this tubular nostril. So that means that they're able to drink the salt water. Also, when you're at sea, there's no signposts. It's an open ocean, and finding your way is very difficult. So they've got good eyesight, but their heads are also stacked full of olfactory cells, which means they have amazing senses of smell. Olfactory cells mean the more olfactory cells, the better your sense of smell. And so a sooty shearwater, which is another member of this tube nose family, was recorded smelling food and changing direction in order to investigate from about 12 miles away. So incredible senses of smell. And these are just a couple of the adaptations which are going to allow them to thrive on the open ocean. But what albatrosses are kind of famous for, what people appreciate them for, and one of the many reasons why I love albatross is just their flying capabilities. They're ridiculous. Although their common name, as I mentioned, refers to their tubular nostrils, their scientific name, Procellaridae, refers to their ability to thrive in strong or violent winds. So procella means violent winds. So put your arms out if you're at home and see how long you can do this without getting tired, and I bet you an albatross can do it for longer. If you watch an albatross, they're doing this for hours on end, and if you look at their facial expressions, at least, it looks like they're not getting particularly tired. And one of the reasons that they're able to do this is they have this cool locking mechanism in their shoulder. So this means that all they have to do is straighten that elbow joint, and a little lock goes in, keeping their shoulder locked outwards, meaning that they can maintain this position for hours without burning very much energy. So a great adaptation when you need to fly. And what you'll also notice if you watch them is that they barely ever flap their wings. So using their huge wingspan, they can harvest both the uplift of the wind, as waves are moving across in the ocean, they're displacing air, which is creating an uplift, and the albatross can utilize this, but they also fly by dynamic soaring. So they open those wings into the wind, and they're going to gain altitude, slow down in speed, and then they're going to turn, and they're going to accelerate down with the wind. And on this downward phase, they can be traveling at speeds of 100 kilometers an hour or even faster. That's 3 times the speed that Usain Bolt can run the 100-meter sprint. And when you look at their heart rate when they're traveling at these speeds, it's only a few beats per minute quicker than when they're sat on the nest. So this means that an albatross traveling at 100 kilometers an hour is exerting about the same amount of energy as I am when I get up after this to go and put the kettle on. So as I mentioned, they have a ridiculous wingspan. And if I told you that the great albatross, so that's your wandering albatross, and your royal albatross have a wingspan of 3.5 meters, that wouldn't really mean a huge amount to you. It's quite hard to comprehend, so I'm going to use my handy volunteer here, Maya, and a very technical piece of scientific equipment to show you just how big the wingspan of a royal or a wandering albatross is. And in order to do this, this room isn't actually large enough. So this here is 3.5 meters. This is the wingspan of a wandering albatross. It's unfathomable. And if you see, that's basically the combined wingspan, even bigger than the combined wingspan of myself and Maya put together. So pretty large surface area. And this is going to allow them to travel at those high speeds and travel huge, huge distances. So, as I said, they're going to travel huge distances over a very quick period of time. So this behind me is a grey-headed albatross, and these have been recorded circumnavigating the entire Southern Ocean in just 46 days. So it's not uncommon for albatross to make this journey here. Wandering albatross have been recorded making it 3 times in a single year, all the way around the Antarctic continent, and it's not uncommon for them to travel over 1,000 kilometers in a single day. So very impressive numbers and figures. Albatross are also very long-lived animals. The oldest albatross known is a Laysan albatross, and her name is Wisdom, and she breeds on Midway Atoll, which is a tiny island in the Pacific near Hawaii, and she's 69 years old. And the oldest of these, the wandering albatross on Bird Island, was 57 years old, so equally, or almost as impressive. And how do we know this about the ages of the albatross? How do we find out this information? Well, another characteristic of the albatross lifestyle is that they return to the same nesting area every single year to breed. And that means that we can put rings on them and we can identify them every time they come back to the colonies and watch them grow older every single year. Although the wandering albatross, they actually breed every other year. As well as coming back to the same nesting area, they are serial monogamists. And so this means that given the opportunity, these birds are going to breed with the same partner every single time they come back to the colony to breed. And so this means that they have really strong bonds. Every time they come back to the colony, you see these incredible courtship dances. And it's amazing to see such large birds, these giants effectively, being so delicate and gentle with each other. So really beautiful. And I recommend that if you have the opportunity after this to just search in YouTube for displaying albatross, and you'll see how, well, it's quite comical and some of the noises are a little bit ridiculous, but well worth a watch. Unfortunately, many of the 22 species of albatross out there are under threat. This picture here shows the same albatross colony on Bird Island, South Georgia, in 1979 and then in 2017. So you can see that back in 1979, this colony is much full of lots of healthy breeding albatross compared to present. And if you looked at the entire South Georgia population, you would see that they've declined over this period by 50%. Some of the colonies that are being monitored are actually declining at 5% a season. Similarly, on Bird Island, I was privileged to live alongside 600 pairs of wandering albatross, so those giants we saw a minute ago. But unfortunately, if I'd have been there 40 years previously, then I would have seen 4 times as many wandering albatross. And there are a number of different causes for this. So from invasive species to plastic pollution and climate change, which you may have seen highlighted in the BBC's Blue Planet 2 or 7 Worlds. But the biggest threat to albatross, most species of albatross, and it's not particularly well known, is actually the fishing industry. I'm going to talk about this a little bit now. So this is a very sad, quite a haunting image, but unfortunately quite common. It's estimated that about 100,000 albatross are killed every year by longline and trawl fisheries, and hundreds of thousands of seabirds are killed by other types of fisheries around the world. And this is referred to as bycatch. So seabirds are attracted to ships. Wandering albatross have actually been recorded changing direction to go and check out a ship from about 30 kilometers away. They go check out and they see these baited hooks, which are conveniently baited with the favorite food of albatross, small fish and squid, and they'll instinctively dive after the hooks and unfortunately get caught on the hook sometimes and drown. You go back to this guy, so these beautiful pair of monogamous birds, when they leave, they're spending their time where there's a lot more fisheries, off the south coast of South America, south coast of New Zealand, Africa, and the males less so. So when you get to the beginning of the next breeding season, what we're unfortunately seeing is lots of males standing tall, but looking confused because their mate hasn't arrived. So breaking up that monogamous pairing. So there are some fisheries that do have huge impacts on seabirds and albatross, but it's really important to remember that not every fishery kills seabirds, just like not every fishery is overfished. We are consumers, or we as consumers have a responsibility to learn about the impacts of the food we eat. And on the screen behind me are two resources that Dr. David Schiffman was talking about in an earlier Earth Live lesson, examples of tools that we can use in order to make the right life choices. So in the UK, we have the Marine Conservation Guide here, the Good Fish Guide, and in the US, there's Seafood Watch, which you can use to help you make different choices. Also, I must reiterate that fishermen are not bad people, and given the opportunity, they will leap at the chance to reduce their bycatch. And there are a few organizations that are actually working with this hypothesis. So RSPB, BirdLife International, the Albatross Task Force, they're working with fishermen around the world in order to develop new technology and methods to reduce the impacts on seabirds. And I've seen how successfully this can be done. On South Georgia, there is a large fishery, and back in the early 2000s, they were catching thousands of seabirds every year. And just by making a few modifications to their fishing methods, that seabird bycatch is now next to nothing. So it is possible. I'd also advise you to check out these organizations because they have some pretty cool outreach there as well. So to end on a positive note, I want to share a really cool way that albatross have been used and utilized in combating illegal fishing. So illegal fisheries are not only a huge impact on seabirds, but also it's actually estimated in the Southern Ocean that the illegal catch of fishing is much larger than the legal catch of fishing. The Southern Ocean is a huge area, and so patrolling this is very difficult, very expensive, very challenging. And so this is where albatross are coming in to help. We know, as I've talked about, that they can cover huge distances. It's not uncommon for them to cover 20,000 kilometers in just 2 weeks. And they are attracted to fishing vessels and will come scout out a fishing vessel from 30 kilometers away. So by putting radar tags on the back of albatross, which we know are attracted to these fishing vessels, when they come in contact with the fishing vessels, it's going to send a little ping, a little bit of information to the fisheries monitoring services, to the authorities, who are going to check whether that vessel they've come in contact with is legal or not. And if it is, then they're going to send the fisheries patrol to investigate and arrest those perpetrators. So pretty incredible how we are using albatross to protect the Southern Ocean fisheries. So I wanted to answer a few questions now. So I'm going to have a look here. You said giant petrels are a top predator. What do they eat? They will eat penguins. I've seen them eat seal pups. Yeah, and they'll scavenge just about anything. Out at sea, especially, they'll take smaller birds as well. But big scavengers as well. I see petrels and shearwaters in the North Atlantic all the time. Will I ever see an albatross in the northern climates? Well, As I talked about, albatross really love wind, and so in order to get into the northern hemisphere, they have to cross the doldrums, which tends not to be particularly easy for them. It would be very energy demanding. So it's very rare that they do cross into the North Atlantic. Saying that, I think for the last couple of years, there's been a black-browed albatross that keeps on turning up. I think it was sat in a pond in Kent a few years ago. So never say never. What is being done to increase albatross populations? Well, a massive thing that was done on South Georgia, and is just about to be done on Gough Island. As I mentioned earlier on, or touched on, invasive species are doing, rats and mice have massive impacts. They'll eat chicks, they'll eat eggs of albatross. And so actually eradication projects go a huge way. And Gough Island has a massive, massive task on their hands trying to eradicate mice. But this is a task that the RSPB have taken upon themselves to go and do. So I think that's commencing this year. Why do albatross not recognize their chick when it falls out of their nest? This is a good question. It's really interesting. They return to the same nest every single year. They recognize the specific nest, and you'll see, and this is the black-broweds. It's less so in the larger, the wandering albatross, because you'll often see their chicks kind of wandering around. But they do, the parents will wait by the nest and they'll come together around the nest. But it's interesting, and I'm not sure exactly why it is, what it is. We know that if you look at things like gulls, that their eggs are unique to the adult, and so they recognize the eggs and they recognize their chick. And it's very strange that albatross are different to all of the other seabirds in the way they do this, and I'm not sure exactly why it is, but as you saw in Seven Worlds, it didn't really work in their favor. Okay. What's worse, grumpy fur seals or grumpy giant petrels? Good question. So what you probably don't know about giant petrels and a lot of these birds in this group is, as a self-defense mechanism, what they do is when you approach them, they throw up on you. They regurgitate all of that rich, oily stuff in their stomach, which they're holding in their stomach, and it smells. And in the right wind, and there's always wind in South Georgia, a giant petrel can throw this horrible smelling oil on you from about 3 to 5 meters away in the right winds, and it smells. I used to work with fulmars sometimes, and when you get covered in that, I used to just burn my clothes. There's nothing you can do to get rid of that smell. So I would much rather work with grumpy fur seals. They get the adrenaline going, but so far I've not been bitten by a fur seal. I don't know if you can see this scar here. That is a giant petrel, so pretty impressive. What seabird have you never seen that you would love to see? What seabird have I never seen that I would love to see? I would love to see some of the Pacific puffins. I've never been up to the Pacific Northwest of America, and so I really love to get up there and see the Pacific puffins. Do all tube-nosed birds use this defense mechanisms? I can't say, because I've not worked with them all. Unfortunately, on ships, it's not uncommon, unfortunately, to get birds colliding with vessels, and a lot of the smaller birds I've handled and not had them throw up on me. So I'm going to say no, but I can't say categorically that all. Yeah. Why can't you just put a windshield to stop the albatross chick falling off the nest? Well, that would be pretty invasive to the whole colony. If you put a windshield up, these are traveling into the colonies at high speeds. That's going to be a big barrier that they're not used to, and it's going to create a problem with birds colliding with it. So unfortunately, it wouldn't work. Do albatross follow ships for food? Yes, they associate ships with, there's so many fishing vessels, and so they come check it out. They associate it with free food. Often the fishing vessels will actually process the fish and throw off the offal. So they are getting a free meal from them, even if they're not fishing. But they also will just follow ships because you get this uplift off the back and they're just hitching a ride. And I think they're a bit inquisitive as well. Yeah. So I just wanted to quickly finish off by answering a question I just got asked on Instagram, and I get asked quite a lot. And it's just about working for the British Antarctic Survey. So people often think of British Antarctic Survey and think you have to be a scientist to work for the British Antarctic Survey, and this is not the case. So 80% of the people working for BAS are not scientists. So if you want to visit South Georgia or any of the Antarctic research stations and you're not a scientist, or you're not particularly good or inclined to follow biology, this doesn't mean you can't go to Antarctica. There is a network of chefs, carpenters, mechanics, boating officers, every job you can imagine, that travel down there every single year with us, and without them, the science that the scientists are carrying out wouldn't happen. So don't let this get in your way. So thank you again, Lizzie, for setting this up, and thank you very much for everyone else for tuning in. Happy Easter, and thanks for watching.